But first to the Pacific Islands, and the small island of Nauru is caught in controversy yet again with a new law that punishes people for speaking publicly about court cases. Legal experts say the Administration of Justice Act is another assault on free speech and freedom of assembly. They say it all relates back to this week 3 years ago, when opposition MPs were arrested for taking part in a protest against their own suspension from Parliament. Following those arrests, the Nauru government deported its resident magistrate, Peter Law, and cancelled the visa of its Chief Justice, Geoff Eames, who then had to resign. Since then, it has drawn out legal action against the former MPs, and now it's barring them and others for speaking out about it. I spoke first to Peter Law, who says the government is seeking to punish anyone who criticises it.
Well, I was deported unlawfully in January 2014. I say unlawfully because the government ignored an injunction issued by the Chief Justice. So that was shocking in itself. But in the last 4 years, the government has taken further steps to undermine, I think, in my view, undermine the court and to really, take away people's rights, freedom of expression. So they've passed laws, for example, about censorship. It's now a criminal offence if you make a statement that may offend somebody publicly, if that's published. So these are things which are aimed at the government, of course, to stymie any criticism of the government. They've closed down what was a community Facebook arrangement where people were able to express dissent or different points of view in respect to the government. That's been closed down. They've introduced laws of unlawful assembly at that
since
time.
Then, just to butt in there, Peter, I mean, since then we've had some real vindictive play by the government, haven't we? We had Roland Kuhn, who was barred from travelling. He had his visa revoked and he has his family here in New Zealand. He's finally got here. I think it was almost 2 years apart from his family. A former president, Sprenta Widow, was also barred from travelling for urgent heart treatment, I think it was. So what's the latest with those MPs in this legal, I mean, it's still going on, this legal proceeding about and it's a criminal proceeding, right? So there's still a cloud over their future.
Well, that is true. The unfortunate thing is that the government has taken away their rights of appeal from the Supreme Court of Nauru. Traditionally, there has been a right of appeal to the High Court in relation to criminal matters. And there had been some appeals lodged by members of the 19 people arrested in respect to sentences that were handed down. Now, that right of appeal has been taken away by the government. The government had announced they're going to replace the High Court with another appeals court, but of course 9 months have passed and nothing has happened. There's been no steps towards an appeals court. So we're looking at sort of rights of people being whittled away, and I think they are very unfortunate developments. Nauru is ostensibly a democracy, but with these rights being taken away, it really raises the question. And they're serious issues. They're serious issues that governments like New Zealand and Australia and other Pacific Forum governments should be concerned about, because they are trampling over the rights of Nauruan citizens.
Now, that's Peter Law, Nauru's former resident magistrate. He was booted out in January 2014, and he says he was physically manhandled by police on the way out. Geoff Eames was the Chief Justice, who was off island at that time in 2014 when his visa was revoked. Now, the new law also forbids people from publishing a court decision, and Geoff Eames says this is aimed at international media ahead of the Pacific Islands Forum the country is hosting in September.
It seems to me when you look at the legislation, it's really directed towards criticism, not just by locals in Nauru, but by the international media. It's part of a series of legislation that's been passed over the last few years dealing with free assembly and free speech. And it is plain to me that this legislation is really being directed to stop a group of people known as the Nauru 19 who have criminal proceedings due to start, and which proceedings will probably be running at the same time as the Pacific Forum. the Nauru government has been extremely sensitive to international criticism or to any criticism at home. And this legislation has a really quite remarkable scope. The legislation states that any member of a group which is protesting or advancing those causes where one of the members says something which is deemed to be in contempt of court, then all of the members are jointly and severally liable for contempt of court.
And of course, Geoffrey, just to jump in there, the punishments for this are quite extreme. I think there's $10,000 in one part of the Act, but also $20,000 depending on the offence, and also jail terms, right?
That's right, up to 2 years imprisonment. I think what it's designed to do is people in Nauru are being warned that if you associate with people who make a criticism of the court, which the government deems to be an attack on the administration of justice, then you're all at risk of getting arrested and charged with contempt of court, carrying such significant penalties. So it's directed towards those people on Nauru at the moment, but it's also directed at the media. It contains an extraordinary scope of power to deal with the media, including the internet, where the publication, even if it's not a publication which has emanated from Nauru, if it's accessible in Nauru, then whatever may have been the intentions or motives of the person who produced the document, if Nauru deems that to be a contempt of court, then it gives itself power to deal with that international contempt of court. All it has to do is arrange for a substituted service of the proceedings, and it can go ahead in the absence of the journalists or the media concerned to respond.
Geoff, finally, what should New Zealand be doing ahead of the Pacific Islands Forum in terms of putting this on the agenda, raising concerns? We stopped the funding to the Ministry of Justice years ago under Murray McCully. What more can be done, even verbally, by New Zealand to highlight this issue and put pressure on the government of Nauru?
I think it should be simply, as much as they can, draw to the attention of the other members of the Pacific Forum that events have not changed. All you can do is keep attention and hope that the international media will not be frightened off by this sort of legislation, but will be all the more determined to give access to the people of Nauru to media reports.
Geoff Eames there, speaking to us from Melbourne in Australia. Earlier we spoke to Peter Law, who was talking to us from Canberra. Now, we must seek balance, and RNZ has again sought comment from the Nauru government, which has for years refused to talk to this organisation as well as others.